I'm Brian Williams. I'm one of the program officers in Lilly Endowment's Religion and Community Development Divisions, and I'm just grateful for all of you all to be here and for this next segment of our schedule. It brings me great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker this afternoon, Dr. Matt Bloom. For 23 years, Matt has been a professor in Notre Dame's Mendoza College of Business. And for more than a decade, he has led the Flourishing in Ministry Project, which is a research study that explores the well-being of clergy and other ministry workers. Matt and his team have also studied the well-being of other caregiving professionals who work for faith-based organizations. And here's the thing, as they move forward, this is one of their hopes and their desires. That is to provide insights about well-being and evidence-based resources so that pastors can practice building and sustaining well-being in their daily lives. And I will say it was maybe 4 or 5 years ago that I first heard Matt give a presentation when I was a member of the Board of Ordained Ministry here in Indiana in the United Methodist Church. His insights into what it takes for a pastor to thrive and to flourish in ministry changed not only the way that I conducted myself as a pastor, but it also helped change the way that our board looked at cultivating pastors for ministry. So I want to welcome to the stage, and would you all help welcome me, Dr. Matt Bloom.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It really is a privilege to be here. You can see I took the business casual dress code seriously. I should have remembered it's a Lilly event, and business casual means coat and tie. But I hope that makes it more comfortable for all of us. And I am delighted to have an opportunity to share with you briefly some of the insights from our Flourishing in Ministry study. As we study pastors across faith traditions and across ministry contexts, it's been a joy to use John's word to do this work, and it's a joy to share with you. As I was thinking about this sharing moment with you today, I kept coming back to this amazing book. If you've read it, you know it's an amazing book, Gilead by Marilynne Robinson. It's an extraordinary work of fiction in which she writes from the perspective of Reverend John Ames. John Ames in this book is a 76-year-old pastor who's lived and worked and pastored in the same small Iowa town his entire life. He surprisingly finds himself later in life married. He thought he'd be a bachelor his entire life. And then he has a young son. Pastor Ames has a heart condition and is dying, and he wants to pass on some thoughts to his son, so the book is a collection of letters he's writing that he hopes his son will read in the future. For me, this fictional character is a model of Christian faith. His faith is deep, his connection to his God is strong, and yet shows up in his peaceful demeanor, in his wisdom, and in what he aspires to live in life. He's lived in a poor town, so he's had to scrape by in ministry, but he's done well, and you get the sense that that has never been a problem for him. Except there's one very poignant theme in the book, and that is that Pastor Ames knows he has no money to pass on for his wife and son, and he worries about their future. And you can tell that even for this man of deep and profound faith, this financial concern is a burden. And so if somebody like Pastor Ames can experience financial burdens, then, well, we all can. I'm going to be sharing today as a scientist. I'm a social scientist. And I'll be sharing with you what we're learning from the perspective of science. But I want to acknowledge that we know that theological perspectives on well-being and finances are important and certainly true as well. And so as I share from science, I'm sure you'll be thinking about it theologically, and we look forward to conversations and more conversations about how theological perspectives can enrich our understanding. So when I share things with you, you'll hear from a scientist. And there will be moments, I'm sure, when I'll hear the theological lenses clicking into gear, and we welcome that. In our time of sharing together, what I hope to do is two things. First of all, share with you our perspective on flourishing in ministry. How have we grown to understand what does it mean to flourish? And then secondly, some of what we're learning about how financial conditions, how a pastor's financial condition shapes flourishing. And my hope is that that will be a common language, a common framework throughout the course of these 3 days that we can use as we talk about the interplay of finances and well-being. And I hope that some of the insights we have about how finances affect well-being will both encourage you that you're doing good work and perhaps offer some insights as you move forward. So this is our model of well-being. I'll walk you briefly through each of the 4 dimensions of well-being and talk about them briefly. But I want to begin by emphasizing that our well-being is fundamentally a social phenomenon. There's a lot of conversation among helping and caregiving professions about self-care, and certainly self-care is important. But our well-being is impacted in important and profound ways by the people that we interact with, those we live and work with. So just like our physical health is impacted by the people around us, so is our well-being. And I will try to emphasize that today because the way finances impact clergy well-being is also fundamentally a social phenomenon, and both Rick and Chris lifted that up for us today. So let's begin a brief conversation, a journey through flourishing. And it has these 4 dimensions, and I'm going to begin with what we call daily well-being. It's the most widely researched dimension of well-being, and I want to dwell on it just a little bit longer than the other 3 dimensions, partly because we think that when financial challenges begin to erode clergy well-being, it most often starts by eroding daily well-being. In other words, financial challenges begin to diminish flourishing through the way they affect daily well-being. So a quick way of thinking about daily well-being is, do you have more days where at the end of the day you feel like this? Or do you have more days where at the end of the day you feel like this? Daily well-being is about the contours of our quality of daily life. It's really about, do we have more good days than bad days, and how those good days or bad days accumulate. I'm just using this to illustrate a possible experience of somebody over a series of several days. You'll see a few not so good days, the gray days, and quite a few really good days. And daily well-being is really just about this ebb and flow of good days versus not so good days or bad days. So quality of daily life experiences is essential to this notion of daily well-being. Another fundamental part of it is the quality of our emotional well-being. And really, in many ways, it's the essence of daily well-being. Are our days full of more positive emotional experiences, peacefulness and calm, joy, awe, wonder, inspiration? Or are our days filled with more negative emotional experiences, frustration, worry, stress? The quality of our daily lives is captured by the preponderance of the emotions that we experience. And so emotional well-being is really at its core. And this is the home of stress. When somebody says they're stressed out, it means that they have challenging daily well-being. They're challenged in their daily experiences. Now, many times when researchers are presenting outside of the academy, we use the term happiness. I've learned that happiness is a theologically complicated term. I had a conversation last year with a United Methodist bishop who told me that happiness was not theologically correct. And I had a conversation with another United Methodist bishop who told me it was theologically correct, and in fact that John Wesley said the Christian life is a life of happiness and holiness. So I understand that there are understandings of happiness that aren't theologically correct. And so perhaps I would use the word with you of authentic happiness. There are genuinely happy experiences. And let me try to illustrate what I mean, because again, we believe that financial challenges start to erode well-being through their impact on what I'm now going to call happiness, the experience of positive days. So one of the questions that researchers have asked is happiness good for you? There are theological answers to this question that I want to know, my team wants to know, and that are important. But as a scientist, we answer these very differently. Is happiness good for people? And we believe it is, and here are some of the reasons that we believe happiness is good. Having more good days than bad days is good. Research consistently shows that if we have more good days than bad days, our physical well-being is increased. There's hard scientific evidence that shows that people that have more good days than bad days are physically healthier. They have stronger cardiovascular systems, they have more responsive immune systems, and more studies are showing they have better neurological health. In fact, several studies point to one way to avoid Alzheimer's and other degenerative brain diseases is to be happy, to have more good days than bad days. We find that people make better decisions, they learn better, they solve problems better when they have more good days than bad days. Somehow it unlocks our capacities to think well. We find that people are more creative when they have more good days than bad days. When they have high daily well-being, it unlocks the capacity to be innovative and creative. And it creates this capacity for them to be at their best in the important social places in their life, including work. Somehow having more good days than bad days unlocks our capacity to be at our best. There was recently a series of studies that showed a really interesting way that happiness helps us be at our best. And it showed that people who have higher levels of daily happiness are more generous, more altruistic, and give more money philanthropically. So as a researcher, these are the kinds of evidence and studies that would make me want to say that daily happiness is very good. Certain understandings of authentic happiness are good. Peace, joy, inspiration, awe, wonder are specific expressions of happiness that researchers have studied, and they consistently are related to these kinds of outcomes. We also find that money matters for experiences of happiness. For example, we find that materialism, people for whom achieving money, gaining material goods are important life goals, people who spend a lot of time trying to earn money or obtain material life goals, tend to have more unhappy days. Materialism leads to unhappiness. We find that pleasure seeking leads to unhappiness. It's kind of ironic. You have a moment of pleasure, but over time, pleasure seeking actually erodes and depletes your capacity to experience authentic happiness. You need the false buzz to get something like false happiness. And we know that people who want to win, who want to be number one, who want to be on top, who want to be regarded as the best, who seek high social prestige, these are also people who experience low levels of daily well-being. They are more unhappy. Which reminds me of what the Bible tells us about the relationship between money and certain kinds of evil. I would say money and happiness is that the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. And in fact, research confirms that the love or desire for money undermines your daily well-being. In terms of who experiences higher levels of well-being, well, pro-social people. People who are generous and altruistic. Isn't this an interesting positive cycle? If you're more pro-social, you'll be happier. And if you're happy, you'll be more pro-social. There's a wonderful positive connection there. We find that people who have strong social relationships, loving families, good friendships, particularly good work friendships, good relationships with coworkers, they tend to report many more happy days. And really good news, people who have a strong connection, well, I've just said this, people who have a strong religious orientation experience more happy days. So what I want to present is this notion that there is some experience of daily well-being that is really tied to the kinds of experiences we have day to day and the kinds of emotions that we experience day to day that is an important dimension of well-being. In part because it leads us to be healthier, to make better decisions, to learn more, to be more creative, to be at our best at work. And it somehow propels us forward in ways like being more altruistic. Daily well-being. The second dimension is resilience, very closely connected to daily well-being. And one part of resilience we call hardiness. The researchers are always trying to come up with new words, but hardiness really means your capacity to deal with daily life. Can you deal with the ups and downs of daily life well? Can you bounce back when you face a setback? Can you deal effectively with the problems in daily life in a way that you can kind of just slough them off? That they can kind of go quickly away and you move forward into the positives. So hardiness is our experience of being able to deal effectively with daily life. That's a part of resilience. Another part of resilience is our ability to adapt and grow, to adapt to situations, to be flexible when we need to, go with the flow when it's appropriate, and to continue to grow and develop our knowledge and skills and abilities, but to grow into fullness as a person, to become a better person. Resilient people are adaptable and intrinsically motivated to continue to grow and develop. So a depleted experience of resilience is a place where people begin to burn out. Burnout is a very, very serious condition. It begins with a sense of chronic fatigue and exhaustion. As it carries forward, it undermines our ability to be at our best, partly because it challenges our daily well-being. And if left unaddressed, burnout leads to things like depression and anxiety and even suicidality. So people who have chronically depleted resilience are people who are prone to and often begin to burn out. So daily well-being, our experience day to day, resilience, our ability to deal with daily experiences and to move forward more positively into the future through adaptability and growth. One of the ways that researchers, when we think about resilience, we often say, we use a muscle metaphor. We say resilience is like a muscle. If you use your muscle, and if you use it a lot, it's temporarily weakened. And so one of the things that happens with resilience is if we have to use our resilience capacity, we're going to temporarily weaken it. Right now, this afternoon, you're using your resilience capacities. You're paying attention to the speakers, you're meeting new people, you're managing a new situation. And so if this evening when you return to your hotel room, you're tired, as a scientist, I would say you have good reason to. Your resilience is somewhat depleted today. But we also know that resilience can be strengthened like a muscle with proper forms of practice. This is some of what we want to share with pastors, the kinds of things that can strengthen their resilience capacity. But somebody whose resilience is chronically weak, who never has an opportunity to recover or strengthen, is the kind of person that's likely to burn out. In many pastors' lives, Sunday morning would be an example of where they have to use a lot of their resilience capacity. There's a lot going on, they're managing their emotions, they're juggling all of the things related to worship, they're meeting and greeting and talking to a variety of people, and so no wonder when they return home after the Sunday morning, they're tired. Again, scientists would say part of that is because your resilience capacity is genuinely depleted. So resilience is this ability to deal well with daily life, and to manage the flow of daily life and to move forward into the future in a more positive way and to be able to take on even bigger challenges and deal with them well. Authenticity, our third dimension of well-being. A part of authenticity is what researchers call self-integrity. It's our sense of self-worth and self-confidence and self-efficacy. Do we feel that on balance we're a person who has worth and value? Do we feel on balance that we're a person who has capacities and capabilities? Yes, do we feel appropriately good about ourselves? It is not at all consistent with narcissism, and I'll talk a little bit more now about why it's not consistent with narcissism. Narcissists actually don't have self-integrity because another part of authenticity and self-integrity is true self-knowledge. This is the term my team and I use, which means that we know ourselves well. We know our strengths and we know our weaknesses. We can embrace the things that we do well and we acknowledge the things we can't do well. A part of true self-knowledge is to be able to acknowledge the better angels of our nature and our brokenness. People with true self-knowledge have a full understanding of themselves, what's good and noble and worthy, and what's broken and unworthy. And true self-knowledge leads, researchers are finding, to a more deep and sustained sense of self-worth. Narcissists don't have true self-knowledge. They only know and think about the good parts of themselves. True self-integrity arises from an understanding of who we are and finding something in that person that we know ourselves to be that is good. And lastly, a really important part of authenticity, a social part of authenticity, is our sense of dignity. And dignity is the extent to which we feel that people honor and respect that true person that we are. That in front of people, in appropriate ways, we can be who we are, we can be the person God created us to be, and people respect and honor that person. Quirks and peculiarities and all. People acknowledge our strengths and honor our strengths. People honor the social roles that we play and fill. So it's both our own sense of self and how we feel that other people respond to us. Dignity is a fundamental part of well-being. One of the things that I'm very interested in my team is to join with researchers, and this is a brand new area of research on the quiet self. And quiet self in terms outside of research is something that you would consider modesty or humility. A person with a quiet self spends very little time thinking about themselves. They're not self-preoccupied. They don't think very much about themselves, and actually they think very little about how other people respond to them. They think about how other people respond to them in ways that they say, what can I learn from this, and how can I grow? It's not at all self-abasing, because what researchers are finding is that in order to have a quiet self, you have to have self-integrity. In other words, what research is pointing to is to have a quiet self, you have to feel good about yourself, and it appears that once you feel good about yourself, you can kind of forget yourself until there's opportunities to grow. I'm fascinated by this research. I aspire to a quiet self. And we want to learn about pastors who have a quiet self and what nurtured that sense of quiet self and what might impede some pastors from experiencing it. And how a quiet self can give rise to well-being across the other dimensions. I think this may be a key for us as we move forward. So authenticity, self-integrity, true self-knowledge, and dignity, and in its fullest form, a quiet self, a self that is self-forgetful. And then lastly, thriving. This is one that I prefer to call transcendence or spiritual vitality. But transcendence is a long and sort of clunky term, so we'll stick with thriving for now. There are three important parts of thriving. One is the extent to which somebody feels a sense of meaning in life. They know what matters, they have clarity around their core values and beliefs, and they have a way of saying what is noble and worthy. To use a phrase that Chris used earlier, they know what a good life looks like. They have a sense of what it means to live well. And secondly, they have a sense of purpose, which means they believe there's ways that they can contribute toward those important things, ways that they can live well, ways that they can help other people experience the good life. In the important roles in life as a parent or a spouse or a friend or a pastor or a professor, they feel like there are intentional ways that they can contribute positively to meaning and to the sense of meaning that other people experience. And then we put deep social connections here because the kinds of social connections that help people thrive are rooted in a shared sense of meaning and a shared honoring of each other's purpose. Good friendships, deep family relationships, wonderful relationships between pastors and parishioners, co-worker relationships, all seem to be rooted in the shared sense of what matters and a shared sense of helping each other live that out. So deep and profound social connections around meaning are a part of thriving. And for pastors, thriving tends to show up in the strength of their call. Pastors who strive or who thrive have a strong sense of calling. They have a sense of meaning in their ministry. They know why their ministry is important. They believe that they have a purpose in living out that ministry, as do others. And they experience strong and positive connections with people who are helping them live their call, even as they help those people live out those persons' call. Certainly authenticity has a role in strength of calling, but deep meaning and purpose and social connections we think are essential to the strength of calling. So there's a quick overview of the four dimensions of well-being. To flourish is to have high well-being across dimensions, to have high daily well-being, to be resilient and be able to sustain your resilience, to experience authenticity both in terms of self-integrity and dignity, and to find meaning and purpose in your life and work, and to have and to sustain strong social connections around that shared sense of meaning. There is a financial side to achieving flourishing. And as I said at the beginning, financial conditions do impact flourishing. And as I was preparing, in addition to thinking about Marilyn Robinson's wonderful book, I rarely look at the news, but I happened to look one day and I saw this startling headline that 1 in 5 millennials with debt expects to die without paying it off. There's a kind of sense of resignation and hopelessness amongst the millennials. I'll never be in a financial position to pay this off. And that resonated with some of what you and we are learning about pastors. And that led me to the deeper study. It was done by Northwestern Mutual, if you're interested, that shows that half of all Americans are anxious or insecure about their financial position. And so the kinds of work you're doing with pastors, one of the ways I think it will bear more fruit is as pastors begin to learn how to have financial well-being, it's going to have a positive effect on Americans who evidently really need it. Half of Americans are anxious, highly anxious, or insecure. I want to talk about 2 specific ways that our research and a large body of research around the world shows that our financial condition affects our well-being. I'm going to first talk about the amount of financial resources that pastors have, their income and their savings. Or the negative is if they have debt, then they have actually negative financial resources. And I may slip into the terminology of calling this absolute financial resources, but absolute I mean the amount. And then I want to talk a little bit about relative amount of money. There is something really important about the amount of money we have and the amount of money that we perceive other people to have. And I want to share a little bit with you about what research tells us about our relative income. This is a place where I think theological explorations will be really important. So let's talk about the amount of financial resources. The amount of financial resources a person has, if they have insufficient financial resources, fundamentally, as I've said, begins to erode their daily well-being. Because of chronically challenged daily well-being, it begins to deplete their resilience resources. And over time, chronically low financial resources is going to undermine daily well-being and resilience. Eventually, as I'll tell you, it'll lead to depletions on the other 2. But it's going to lead to pastors who are stressed out and burned out, who aren't able to be at their best in their ministries, and who have the kinds of outcomes that burnout leads to. And there are a number of important ways that financial resources begin to deplete our daily well-being. So one of them is simply we can't meet daily living needs. We heard some stories about this. We're making these sorts of trade-offs. I'll take a cheaper and less safe apartment because then I can actually afford to pay for the food and electricity. So it challenges our ability to meet our daily living needs. But even if we can meet our daily living needs with too little financial resources, we can't take advantage of other important things. We can't buy life insurance. We can't protect our families in the future. We can't plan for our children's education or retirement. So even if we have enough to meet daily needs, our monthly bills, we can't anticipate or plan for future needs and future benefits. If we have too little financial resources, it makes the pain of misfortune greater. If I get bronchitis, I can go to my physician. If I can't drive myself to my physician, I can call a taxi. Somebody with too little financial resources can't. They bear an extra burden of misfortune. If they miss work, they may not get paid. Their children may not then be able to go to school. So the pain of misfortune, the burden of misfortune is increased when we don't have financial resources, in addition to the domino effect that we heard about earlier, where one small catastrophe leads to other catastrophes. And so in this case, lower financial resources makes life just more precarious. It makes it more hard and more difficult. And so all of this accumulates to creating stress and worry and anxiety that dominate many daily life experiences. And in fact, what other researchers find, and we're finding this with clergy, is when they have too little financial resources, they have to spend too much time dealing with money and not enough time on ministry and life-giving experiences. Most of their time is spent trying to solve the money problem. So life is precarious, and it becomes stressful, and it becomes dominated by their financial worries. And it erodes their daily well-being, even though many of them try to overlook it, and it makes them less resilient, and they're going to become physically sick, and they're going to become burned out, and they're going to be less effective in their work. There's been a lot of research done in the United States on, okay, if lower financial resources lead to challenged daily well-being and resilience, how much is enough? And researchers have studied this with tens of thousands of people, and we have an answer. We have an answer. We can tell you how much money it takes so that your financial condition won't shape your daily well-being. Other things will shape your daily well-being, but we can tell you. In fact, we know that above this amount of money, making more money isn't going to make you any happier. But we know below this amount of money, you're going to face financial challenges that are going to undermine your happiness and your resilience. And it's $75,000 a year. So part of the news from science is that this probably is a living wage. It's a lot of money, particularly for an individual to achieve. But we know below this money, people will be chronically challenged in their daily well-being with all of the other conditions that ensue. So part of the way that money impacts well-being is through the way it erodes daily well-being or happiness and the way it depletes our resilience. But over time, it begins, we think, to undermine a pastor's sense of authenticity. We've heard stories today, you've heard stories that really point to this, and it is the sense of shame that a pastor experiences that begins to undermine their sense of authenticity. What kind of person am I if I'm subjecting my family to this financially precarious lifestyle just because I think I'm called to ministry? We've heard pastors articulate that thought. I must be wrong about my call to ministry if this is the way that things are going to be in my ministry. And so left untreated over time, we think it will deplete self-integrity. Pastors will start to doubt their call, doubt their decisions, doubt their ministry effectiveness, and they'll start to think about leaving ministry. And one of the things that we want to look into going forward is how many pastors leave ministry not for financial reasons, not because they didn't make enough money, but because they thought that they really weren't called to ministry. And the hidden problem was the financial concerns. So absolute money, the amount of resources a pastor have matter for daily well-being, for resilience, and for authenticity. But relative money, relative income, how much we make compared to other people matters as well. And I want to begin to illustrate how this matters by referencing an amazing study that's ongoing in the United Kingdom called the Whitehall Studies. It's a study of thousands of British civil servants. There's a number of things that makes this study a groundbreaking study. One is that they're following people over time. And with the wonderful blessings of the Lilly Endowment, our next 3 years, we're going to start to do a longitudinal study of clergy well-being to model what the Whitehall study has done. They follow people over time. They have in-depth information about their physical health, everything from physicians' visits to the diseases and illnesses and injuries they experience to when they die. Many people in this study have died because it's been so long. They can study the person's work, the stresses in their work, their working conditions, where they live, making differences between people who live in polluted environments versus clean environments. They know that all of the British civil servants have access to the same quality of health care. And what they find is that when you control for all of those factors, including the lifestyle choices people make, and all of those things are important for physical health, they find that independent of those factors, the people in the lower pay grades have much worse physical health. And the explanation there is somehow that they're making less money than the people above them. In fact, they find that the death rate for people in the lowest pay grades is 3 times the death rate of the people in the highest pay grades. There's something about their relative pay that matters. And so they and other researchers, and I've done some research on this, are trying to understand what is a mechanism through which, when we think about our pay compared to other people's pay, that it has such a potentially detrimental impact on our physical health, and we're interested in how it impacts our well-being. And we think it works primarily by eroding authenticity and thriving. Part of what the Whitehall studies found is that one of the conditions is what they call effort-reward imbalance. Everybody admits there are certain jobs that should be paid more, and they understand that, but at some level they think, well, yeah, but I'm working hard. Should I get that much less than those people? And so there's a sense of being treated unjustly. That somehow, it's not that I should make as much as them, but there's a big difference here and I don't understand the difference, and there's a tension, a sense of unfairness or injustice that begins to build. That would erode their sense of dignity. They would wonder why they're getting paid less. The more pronounced effects are that whether we should do this or not, particularly in our culture, we take our pay compared to other people's pay as a signal of the value of our work role and a signal of the value of us in our work role. If my job is paid so much less than another job, then I'm likely to interpret that as my job just doesn't matter. And what happens is then people go the next step and say, then I just really don't matter. I'm not valued by this organization. What I do isn't valued. And so that undermines a sense of self-integrity and a sense of dignity, and over time is going to make somebody feel like there isn't meaning and purpose in their work. They're going to begin to wonder. A third way that relative income might impact clergy, so part of it would be if I'm paid less than other pastors at other churches, or if I'm paid a lot less than the amount of money my parishioners mean, does that mean they don't value me as a pastor? Does that mean they don't value my ministry? And that might be one way that it really affects pastors. I must not be good at this. I must not really be called. I must not be doing the right thing. It also, we think, creates tension between a pastor and the local church context. One of the things that we know is really important for well-being across the four dimensions is what we call pastor-church alignment. When a pastor says, yeah, I have the right skills for this church, and the way they think of ministry and the way I think of ministry, there's an alignment there. We have a common sense of what it means to be in ministry, and I've got the skills to lead that ministry. But we think a pay imbalance begins to strain this sense of alignment, that pastors first maybe begin to think, well, I'm not the right pastor, but it may also create tension, like, why are you treating me this way? And so it begins to undermine this critical sense of, we are in ministry together, I'm the right pastor for this church. So some of the things we're interested in understanding deeper is, where does this sense of relative pay come from? It might come from partly pastors saying, well, I don't expect to make as much money as my parishioners, but what if there's a large difference? Does that partly play into this? Well, they're making a certain amount of money, but they're only paying me this much money. These are difficult things for pastors to talk about because theologically they want to say, I shouldn't feel that way. But if they're like most people, and I think they are, these things bubble up in the background. And how about differences in pastor pay within a judicatory or a denomination? Boy, this is a difficult one. But if I'm going to earn a lot more money at that church, or if that pastor's earning a lot more money at that church, what does that say about my ministry, and what does that say about me as a pastor? And so these relative differences in pay do accumulate. And we think through undermining a sense of authenticity, challenging self-integrity and dignity, and through undermining a sense of ministry, meaning and purpose, and challenging a pastor's sense that this is the correct call for them. I want to particularly then highlight, we think that when these experiences happen early in a ministry, they're particularly damaging. We talk about trajectories of well-being. We're still trying to tease this apart. But it seems like if pastors get a good start, we're trying to figure out all of what it means to have a good start, that in generally they're going to be on a trajectory of flourishing. They'll have highs and lows. There'll be dips and peaks. But in general, those pastors seem to flourish. And pastors who don't have a good start seem to be challenged in their well-being for many years, maybe for their entire time in ministry. They're on a trajectory of poor well-being or a trajectory of ill-being. And given the kinds of things that I've illustrated, that we're learning about how financial challenges impact daily well-being and resilience, and particularly their impact on authenticity and thriving, we worry that pastors who face challenges earlier in their career are going to be on a trajectory of ill-being. And one of the things that we think is happening is it's really hard to get out of that trajectory of ill-being unless There is really intentional effort by the pastor, by the pastor's church, and the pastor's judicatory or denomination to help them get out of it. You can't get out of that trajectory on your own, we don't think. So really paying attention to these issues with early career, early ministry, early service pastors is a really important place. And I commend many of your projects for looking there. So what I've hoped I've done in the time, and my gosh, you guys are paying attention, it's wonderful, is to give you a little bit of a framework on well-being. I mean, it's not like my students at all who have their heads down on their desk. It was give you a framework for well-being and to illustrate how it can be used, we think, as a lens for understanding how personal finances impact a person's and a pastor's well-being, and that you can use it from here to deepen your understanding of your own projects and where your projects might go. I should have introduced Manuela Castigliegli, who's my colleague, who's here somewhere in the crowd. Manuela and I would love to share more with you about our project. Particularly, we have some resources that we could make available to you. We have a portal that pastors can go to and get their own well-being profile and keep track of their well-being. We have an app that has evidence-based practices, small things that pastors can do right now, today, that evidence shows will make a big impact in their well-being. And because of the generosity of God as channeled through the Lilly Endowment, we can make these available to you, and we'd love to talk with you a little bit more about that. And lastly, one of the things we always tell pastors when we work with them is that no matter where you are in your journey toward well-being, no matter where you are in your journey towards flourishing, there is an important small step you can take. There is something you can do, and we are here to help. And I would say the same thing to you. No matter where you are in your journey, we're here to help. So please reach out to us. Our website is undergoing a major change, so we hope in a few months it'll be even more helpful to you. But no matter where you are in your project, if we can help, we'd be delighted to help. So I want to thank you for your kind attention and look forward to conversations with you over the course of this week.